after this tragic explosion that happened at the port in Beirut, you had these protests, people trying to cover up corruption, the Lebanese people demanding the resignation of everybody in the government, and effectively you had Diab and his cabinet resign. However, what I want to bring your attention to is the way in which the West is taking advantage and trying to capitalize off of this crisis. So, on the one hand, I already showed you before that the IMF refused to give Lebanon any money. This was already the case months ago. And once again, they reaffirmed their position earlier this week that unless Lebanon reforms their government, which is code, which is politicians speak for, we want to see a government that conforms to Western standards, to US hegemony. Lebanon is not getting any more money from the IMF. So they're reminding them. And Lebanon's already in an economic crisis. Now on top of it, they need that money to rebuild. So that's one thing, which again further illustrates how these international bodies such as the IMF and the World Bank, not just impose austerity and reform upon other countries, but even capitalize off of tragedies to implement their policy. And so that's one thing. On top of that, you have one of the British Navy's ships that is docked in Beirut. Now, okay, they say, oh, we're bringing kitchens. But when I looked at the video and when I showed you the video, you have British troops walking around with machine guns in the Beirut port. So, you can call that delivering humanitarian aid, but I submit to you, why couldn't they send a civilian ship? Why does the Royal Navy have to send a ship? Why is the ship still there? They offloaded and unloaded the equipment. Why is it still there? Why doesn't it go back to Cyprus? On top of that, the French are now sending their army. They're already there. They're sending jets and ships, not just to quote unquote help the Lebanese, but also to send a message to Turkey. God, that is like the ugliest ship I've ever seen in my life, officially. Okay. so just saying. And so this is to do with Libya as well. But nonetheless, you have French troops now in Beirut. On top of that, the United Nations Security Council, which is set to vote on renewing the UNIFIL mandate, so the United Nations interim force in Israel, Lebanon. This is the UN peacekeeping mission between the South Lebanese border and Israel, where my parents served. And the United States is threatening to veto that because the vote is going to take place on August 31st. Okay. And the vote is just meant to extend the mandate. That's it. There's no change. There's no conditions. It's just a renewal. It was set to happen regardless. But the United States is now taking the Israeli position, which is they want to reduce the number of UN peacekeepers there from 15,000 to 11,000. They want to move them further in because Israel claims, oh, the UN peacekeepers are too far away to actually create a buffer between them and Israel. So they want to move them in further inside the Lebanese border so they can box Hezbollah in. They're just using this as an excuse to screw with Hezbollah. Because at the end of the day, 14 years ago, when you had the war in 2006, Israel is the one that was shelling UN positions and killed several UN peacekeepers from the UNIFIL mission. And you had Macron, the French president, straight up warning Iran. I love these headlines, these Western journalists, how they write. They always write from a position of white supremacy, as if a French president or a Western president is in any position to give warnings, like as if they're a parent telling off a child. No, show some fucking respect to Iran and show some fucking respect to other countries, okay? You're not superior, you're not better, okay? So the French president, Emmanuel Macron, he was trying to threaten Iran and tell them, oh, you better not interfere inside of Lebanon. You better not exert any more influence inside of Lebanon for this reconstruction. So once again, using this tragedy, trying to capitalize off of this as a means to threaten Iran via Lebanon, right? So on top of that, I already talked about the people inside of Lebanon and also in Israel that are trying to spin this as being 100% Hezbollah's fault, which is ridiculous because the entire government is based off of a confessional system, which meaning everyone has equal responsibility if you're going to say that the government is corrupt. But nonetheless, they're trying to make it all about Hezbollah because they want to disarm Hezbollah and they also want to mess with Iran via Lebanon, just like they're trying to mess with Iran via Syria. So you have to pay attention, once again, to how these international bodies and institutions, the IMF, the UN, you have to pay attention to how these countries, the United States, France, UK, Israel, are taking advantage, are capitalizing off of this tragedy to exert their foreign policy. And they're putting conditions on this humanitarian aid, which is a contradiction of terms. If it's humanitarian aid, the only condition is that you're a human being. That's why you receive help. You're human. But when you try to attach strings to it and condition it, now it's a bargaining chip. Now you're playing politics. Once again, lifting the veil, proving to you that this is just a masquerade. They don't actually care about helping the Lebanese. I mean, even these $300 million that the United Nations and France raised to help Lebanon a few days ago is a drop in the ocean compared to how much money Lebanon has already lost and will continue to lose because of the sanctions that the West is imposing and the sanctions that are being imposed on Syria, which hurts trade between the two countries and hurts their economies and their currencies. So if they really wanted to help Lebanon, they would lift these sanctions. If they really wanted to help Lebanon, that's what they would do. But no, here's some crumbs. Oh, and by the way, there's strings attached. You better do what the West wants. You better do what we want. But of course, they won't tell you this on mainstream media. They try to make it look like as if, oh, look, we're just here to help. White man is so generous. Look, oh, the West, we're so humanitarian and we're so concerned with philanthropy. And so you got to pay attention to these games, right? They're trying to mix in a disaster with politics now.